One of the toughest traps to fall into with your customer is, in fact, one of the toughest, simply because it actually feels so good when you fall into it. And that is the trap of when your customer looks you in the eye and says, I totally agree. Beware of these words, because while it feels really good, wow, the customer agrees with me, we're making progress, we're moving forward, I totally agree, we're going to get this thing done in the next week. If you stop and think about the words, I totally agree, it's sort of like you damn me with faint praise, because what it really indicates is you haven't actually taught me anything new. You've simply confirmed what I already believe. And that begs some really interesting questions around, well, what do they already believe? They already believe that this is exactly what they need. They already believe that they should probably get a discount. They already believe that you're one of 3 companies that should compete based on price for this particular solution. Those can be pretty bad places to be. So when you show up to your customer with an idea, with an insight, with a perspective, whether it's about their strategy, a way to make money, save money, or about a way to move through the decision-making process, or who to get involved, that when they agree with you, it's not that that's necessarily a bad thing per se, but it does indicate perhaps that maybe you haven't pushed hard enough on their thinking. I'm always looking, when I find I'm talking to a commercial leader and they agree with me, to find like, how can I push their thinking? What's the thing I can say next that gets them say, not I totally agree, but I've never thought about it that way before. To me, that's the moment when the customer says, I've never really thought about it that way before. I've never really thought about it in that with those particular words or from that particular perspective. At that point, for me, that is the litmus test that I'm bringing value, that I'm adding something new, that I'm being additive and not just confirmatory in my exchange with that particular customer. And while it actually doesn't feel necessarily as good, because sometimes it comes out more aggressively, right? Like, I totally disagree with what you're saying, at which point you have to make a choice. Do I back down or do I double down, right? Do I find a way with evidence, with credibility, with humility, with empathy to try to win that individual over to that perspective, whatever it might be? And that's sometimes a judgment call, but that's the moment where you're actually engaging in a worthwhile, valuable conversation. At the very least, if they continue to stick with their position, you've given them an opportunity to pressure test that position. And to the degree that they come over to your side, you've given them an opportunity to think about something new, a new perspective that perhaps they hadn't yet considered, and that can be valuable. Versus someone's like, every time I talk to that guy or that person, they just confirm everything I know. It's kind of like, well, then I don't really need to talk to that person nearly so much. This is something to think about. There's, in some ways, I talked a lot about this in the Challenger sale and the heart and soul, like the difference between a customer says, I totally agree, versus, I never thought about it that way before. And I think that same idea expands well beyond sort of the Challenger idea to this idea of frame making and helping your customers navigate their buying process, or defining value, or including different stakeholders that they might not have considered. All of that is fair game to get your customers to say, I never thought about it that way before, because that's you bringing new perspectives which are valuable to the table, as long as they don't become overwhelming. Now, there's a kissing cousin to this idea, which is, to me, people ask, what's keeping you up at night? I'll tell you what keeps me up at night as a researcher. It's the kissing cousin to this idea. It is what I call the false positive problem, which is not just when your customer agrees with you, but they agree with you, but they're mistaken in their agreement. What I mean by that, and this is literally the thing that makes me completely nutso as a researcher presenting new ideas that are supposed to challenge one's thinking, to really push the envelope, get someone to think very differently. And I put this idea on the table to get them to say, I'm anticipating to say, wow, I've never thought about it that way before. And they say, no, I totally agree. And then you look at what they're agreeing at and you say, no, I know for a fact that you're not doing this, or you're not thinking this. And that's what I call the false positive problem. And then again, with humility, with empathy, you have to kind of slow down and say, and really find the devil in the details, and help your customer or your interlocutor understand the very subtle but critically important differences between what you're saying and what they think you're saying, because that little gap right there, that's the value. And sometimes that value can be incredibly subtle, but sometimes I find it's an inverse proportional, like the greater, or it's a direct proportional relationship of like the greater the subtlety, the greater the value, because that's the thing that's most often overlooked. So watch out for those false positives. When someone looks you in the eye and says, I totally agree, one, you haven't taught them anything new, or two, you have taught them something new and they've completely missed the point. Something to think about next time your customer looks you in the eye and says, I totally agree.